I just wanted to call attention to two sentences that jumped out at me. One, this is talking about Flynn as the person. They say the defendant's record of military and public service distinguish him from every other person who has been charged as part of the special counsel's investigation. And here's the key sentence. However, senior government leaders should be held to the highest standards.
Yes.
As we think about how Mueller is going to characterize what went on in the Trump White House, the fact that he is saying senior government leaders should be held to the highest standards, I would be a little nervous if I were the people involved in the obstruction of justice investigation, starting, of course, with the President of the United States. That statement that senior government leaders should be held to the highest standards, I don't think that is just filler material. I think that is a statement of how Mueller is going to approach the remainder of his investigation as he starts thinking about the people in the White House.
And Colonel Peters, that's something you had essentially said earlier, that he should be held to a higher standard given his background. I mean, I'm sure books will be written about this, but I'm sort of fascinated with the idea of what happened to Michael Flynn. Sort of what did, from going from somebody who was universally described as a operational, tactical, I don't know if genius is the right word.
Just about a genius.
Just about a genius in the field, to then, running the DIA and being, said to be not very much of a strategic thinker or a manager, and then leading chance of lock her up, which for a former high-ranking military officer, I mean, I know many in the military were just stunned that he was going that far to campaign for Trump.
Yeah, indeed. But I'll tell you, with Mike, we were captains in the captain's course together in training in 85. And if there was one person in that class you would pick out as good, he's going to be a general, it was Mike Flynn. Shiniest boots, but a shiny mind, too. And as he matured through the service, his work improved and improved. He was, I'm stingy with the word hero, but his work certainly verged on the heroic. And then and General Clapper can talk to this even better than I can, when he was basically fired from DIA, if with velvet gloves, he got angry, and he got greedy. And, Theodore Dreiser's book, An American Tragedy, steal the title. For me, the rise and bitter downfall of Mike Flynn is an American tragedy. But to the core of your question, we all come at these problems with our own prejudices, our own backgrounds and views. And mine is that at a time when in Washington, ethics are in virtual collapse on many fronts, military officers must be held to higher standards. We have to show that somebody still has integrity and honor in government. We should be the examples, which is why, in my earlier remarks, I came down so hard on Mike.
Shimon, Sarah, I know you're looking for more.
There's a part here that talks about, so we know that Michael Flynn was talking to the former Russian ambassador, but there's a part here where the Mueller's team is talking about Flynn reaching out to a Russian government emissary. It was regarding, he conveyed to the Russian government through that emissary and Russia's response to those requests. It had to do with the UN, the Security Council resolution. And it says here that Flynn was talking with this Russian emissary, and it was about material that was important to the FBI's investigation into the nature of any links or coordination between the Russian government and individuals associated with the Trump campaign. So certainly here, this tells us they have a ton of other information that they're able to corroborate, probably intelligence that they were able to gather. And now they have a witness. They have Michael Flynn, who can talk about some of these reach outs and some of these contacts.
What's so fascinating about the kind of the drips and drabs we are learning is that there has just been radio silence about Michael Flynn for more than a year now. So to finally suddenly see anything, even if it's, heavily redacted and there's sort of, more questions than answers, it is fascinating.
It is, and there are really only hints of it, but they do talk about, how he had firsthand knowledge, how he was there so early, and you get hints in this filing. They're not just talking about one or two of these instances. They're talking about potential contacts with Russians during the campaign. They're also talking about it during the transition. And then obviously we know what happened to Michael Flynn once he got into the White House and then tried to cover all of these things up. And so Flynn, I think, is such a useful witness to the government because he can help show that arc of the story, how these contacts perhaps may have started, how they evolved during the transition. I mean, one of the things that this doesn't doesn't name names of who he was speaking with. That's one of the big questions, is who did he share this information with as he was learning? We know some of the senior Trump campaign and transition officials he shared information with, but, there's no mention of whether the things he was doing ever made their way to the top.
Well, also, Director Clapper, the fact that, Sally Yates, upon gaining some information about Michael Flynn, rushes over essentially to the White House, meets with Don McGahn, and then Michael Flynn essentially saying he could be compromised. Michael Flynn is not fired or let go for some 2 weeks, and so that's an interesting time time frame that we don't know much about what was being said in the White House, why it went on for 2 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is a very key period of what went on in the White House. What were the discussions with Mike and with those around him about what was transpiring during that period? And again, we don't know exactly the substance of any of this, but the inference here is that his revelations, I think, could prove to be quite significant.
Laura, also, there's been a lot of talk, is the Mueller investigation wrapping up? We're going to hear more about Manafort this week. We're going to hear a filing on Michael Cohen. And certainly folks in Trump world have been saying this thing is wrapping up now for, I can't even remember how long they've been saying this, but it seems like every holiday was the time it was going to wrap up. Does this give you a sense of any kind of time frame?
Well, it certainly does in terms of the usefulness of at least one person, Michael Flynn. With one president responding in writing, you've essentially wrapped up 3 other cases, have moved to the forefront of the court's mind: Mueller, Cohen, and Michael Flynn. Within a week of the president handing in his written answers, Manafort, Cohen, and Michael Flynn. They've all been accelerated to the front of the line of cases being handled, although there was in radio silence. And frankly, Flynn has been a recluse practically for the past year. So it does tell me that there perhaps was a linchpin aspect of the president's own testimony. One thing very interesting to me about the filings is that they point out, and they go to great lengths to talk about, that they don't believe in the false absence of recollection, that the faulty memory of Michael Flynn was played an issue, and how they were to confirm that he was making misstatements and lies. And that should speak volumes, because we already know that Mueller has a particular aversion to those who lie to his investigators. He details in the report that he's saying essentially it impedes the ability of the American people to understand what has happened. And most importantly, the President of the United States just handed in a series of answers. It all began with the best of my recollection. It's the notion that that Mueller's team is not persuaded by those with so-called faulty memories or perhaps selective amnesia. When you can corroborate the contrary, it's going to be very important going forward of how he deals with this.
Jeff Toobin, do you have any more sense now of, do you believe this thing is wrapping up?
It sure doesn't look wrapped up to me. Just think about the very fact that so much of this is redacted. The whole point of redacting something, and we're not talking about classified information, we're talking about law enforcement information. The whole point of redacting information in a legal document is not to tip off people who are involved or subjects of an investigation, not to tell people where he's going. If you're done, you can tell people where you're going. You can tell people what you've done. The only reason to redact all this information is that more is coming. Now, does that mean there will be more indictments? Does that mean some of these sealed documents that are in Washington court relate to this case? I don't know. But this document does not suggest to me that Mueller is done by any means.